Welcome to our fourth session, Building the Case. Last sessions has given us the analytical and theoretical framework as well as the necessary background to critically evaluate Sport for Peace initiatives. In this session, we will take a closer look at some examples around the world that are using Sport for Peace initiatives. We will start our tour in my homeland and will review some of the efforts made in Israel, Palestine to address the protracted conflict through sport. Then, we will discuss the internal struggle in South Africa in the post-apartheid era and how sport can and is playing a part in bridging the divide. Sri Lanka is our stop in Asia. Although the armed conflict has ended, the impact from it on the torn and divided community is still noticeable, and sport plays a part in the collective healing process. Lastly, we will take a look at the role that professional sports teams are playing in generating social impact, as well as efforts for peace. Let's start with Israel and Palestine. The Israeli-Palestinian conflict is the one dearest to my heart, obviously. Not only that I am an Israeli and a peace activist who wants to live through the day that this conflict will be over, for the purpose of this course specifically, I have a wide perspective and vast experience in various initiatives that aim to use sport for conflict resolution and peace building in my part of the world. Let me first give you a very quick overview of the conflict. Israel is the world's only state that its dominant religion is Judaism, which can be perceived also as a national identity. Palestinians, the Arab population that hails from the land Israel now controls, refer to the territory as Palestine and claims a state on all or part of the same land. The Israeli-Palestinian conflict is over who gets that land and how it's controlled. Though both Jews and Arabs, Muslims, date their claims to the land back a couple thousand years, the current political conflict began in the early 20th century. Jews, fleeing persecution in Europe, wanted to establish a national homeland in what was then an Arab and Muslim majority territory in the Ottoman and later British Empire. The Arab resisted, seeing the land as rightfully theirs. An early United Nations plan to give each group part of the land failed, and Israel and the surrounding Arab nation fought several wars over the territory. Today, lines largely reflect the outcomes of two of these wars, one waged in 1948 and another in 1967. The 1967 war is particularly important for today's conflict, as it has left Israel in the control of the West Bank and the Gaza Strip, two territories home to large Palestinian populations. In addition, 21% of Israel's population, excluding the West Bank and Gaza, is Arab and comprised of Muslim, Christian, and other non-Jewish minorities, all of which have Israeli citizenship. Today, the West Bank is nominally controlled by the Palestinian Authority and is under Israeli occupation. This comes in the form of Israeli troops who enforce Israeli security restrictions on Palestinian movement and activities on the ground. Israeli settlers, Jews who build ever-expanding communities in the West Bank that effectively deny the land to Palestinians. Gaza is controlled by Hamas, an Islamic fundamentalist party, and is under Israeli blockade, but not ground troop occupation. The two Palestinian groups may have reconciled on 2015, creating one shared Palestinian government for the first time since 2007. The primary approach to solving the conflict today is called the two-state solution that would establish a Palestine as an independent state in Gaza and the West Bank, leaving the rest of the land to Israel. Though the two-state plan is clear in theory, the two sides are still deeply divided over how to make it work in practice. Many organizations have used sport as a tool for peace in the region since the early 90s, and in particular in conjunction with the Oslo Accords peace process. I have led sport-based initiatives as a means for dialogue between Palestinians and Israelis in two of these non-profits, the Peres Center for Peace and Mifalot. In addition, I'm familiar with the work of other organizations that use similar methodology, and that includes Football for Peace, Peace Players International, Maccabim Association, Budo for Peace, Ultimate Frisbee, Seeds of Peace, and other local initiatives. In a presentation I gave at the Peace and Sport Forum in Monaco, I have laid out some of the findings from an evaluation study conducted by Professor Gal Harmat on a program that I was leading. The program, called Twin Peace Sports School, is trying to address the two conflicting populations, Palestinian and Israeli youth, through the use of sport, mainly soccer and basketball. At that time, I was part of the Peres Center for Peace, an NGO that uses the European model of bringing conflicting population through civil society activities, people-to-people approach, and enhancing engagement through a common interest. The Peres Center has various departments. Each one represents a field of collaboration between the two nations: economy, agriculture, health, etc. In staff meetings, my colleagues used to tease me once in a while, what does sport have to do with peace? It is not serious enough. Sport will never solve a conflict. It is a nice to have and not must have, etc. But in fact, our project has proven that sport is a very effective tool to foster a humanization effect of the so-called other side. Sport's inclusive nature, cultural sensitiveness, community-based and easy and compelling pooling factor has enabled our program to increase awareness of coexistence, educate and form a sense of shared identity, even temporarily. In Israel and Palestine, sport teaches valuable life skills, bridges cultural divides, is a vehicle for social mobility and build civil society regardless of the encounter between the two groups. When the two conflicting parties meet, the in-group factor takes precedence and it has the ability to build a new temporary identity as a new group. One of the highlights of our project was the Mini World Cup, where Palestinians and Israeli kids were playing in mixed teams under the flag of their favorite nation from around the world, in a joint effort to win the cup together as a team. One immediate observation was that no matter if you are a Palestinian or an Israeli kid, everyone wanted to play for Brazil. The Twin Peace Sports School taught us that peace is a natural result of community empowerment. Through dialogue and play, we are able to lessen social tension, give sense of normalcy, and as a result, cope with the abnormality, which is the conflict. Our project has faced serious understandable obstacles, and we were hoping to address or remedy them by providing a concrete solution. To an environment that faces prejudice and racism, we offered humanization in return. The pressing realities on the ground, such as checkpoints and rockets, we created an alternative reality where equality and normalcy are given in return. Political inclinations were addressed by a people-to-people approach. Language and cultural barriers were met by knowledge and by a common narrative. And finally, the so-called fear factor, which is the demonization of the other side, was countered by building trust. The evaluation concluded that this project, one of the few in the world in an active war zone, is probably the only chance to meet the other side. It breaks down stereotypes and is highly relevant to the needs of its community. By promoting empathy and providing coaches network that are local leaders, we gain parental and community credibility and practice what has become as a meaningful dialogue. His Excellency Mr. Manuel Hassassian, Palestine's ambassador in the United Kingdom since 2005, in his words exemplified the common Palestinian perception on peace building through sport. All of the successful projects in Israel and Palestine were a collaboration between an Israeli organization and a Palestinian one. The only way to get a legitimization from the community was to work with a local-based grassroots organization. But the Palestinians were in even a more delicate situation. The common practice by Palestinian leadership was to reject what is referred to as normalization. This meant not to be engaged in cross-border activities such as sport until the Palestinian claims will be met and peace agreement will be signed. That obviously created a lot of pressure on the Palestinian side. The fear factor and the mistrust between people can be overcome through sport though. Hassassian agrees that peace can seem elusive and it's easy to get into violence, but a sustainable peace is much more than agreement. And all segments of society have a role to play. Peace building builds attitude, perception, and even a mode of political behavior, but it is also a big gap between the have and have not. The gap between the Palestinians and the Israelis is huge when it comes to their political rights, their economic capacities, and their freedom. Without acknowledging the gap between the two parties, sport alone will be useless. Sport is a dialogue tool, and peace is the ultimate solution. The Palestinians' perspective highlights the need for a parallel process that will ensure a political solution to the conflict. When we aspire for peace, we should be aspiring also for making justice, per Hassassian. Lastly, I will repeat his optimistic remarks. If there is a will, there's a way. The case of South Africa is different. It is not a cross-border conflict, but rather an internal one. The basis of this conflict was racial discrimination. As a short background, after the National Party gained power in South Africa in 1948, its all-white government immediately began enforcing existing policies of racial segregation under a system of legislation that is called apartheid. Under apartheid, non-white South Africa, a majority of the population, would be forced to live in separate areas from whites and use separate public facilities, and contact between the two groups would be limited. Despite strong and consistent opposition to apartheid within and outside of South Africa, its laws remained in effect for the better part of 50 years. In 1991, the government of President de Klerk began to repeal most of the legislation that provided the basis for apartheid. Mandela and de Klerk negotiated an end to apartheid and organized the 1994 multiracial general election, in which Nelson Mandela led the African National Congress Party to victory and became president. However, 20 years after the abolishment of the apartheid regime, South Africa is still facing with an internal divide between its diverse population. As a sport-loving nation, it had fertile ground for the use of it as an opportunity for community development and peace building. Kame's article demonstrates the importance of sport in finding a new narrative as a tool for social integration and nation building in South Africa. She argued that although sport might be a means of non-verbal communication, language plays a major role in South Africa, in the sense that as an unintentional subtext, it indicates that the speaker belonged to a particular group. As a solution, she offers multilingual coaches, trainers, and teachers who are essential to the promotion of multiculturalism. Based on the contact theory model, greater contact between cultural groups and communities should be taken into place. Such an initiative, if properly organized and structured, would foster understanding across cultures and build cohesion between communities. Accessibility is a key factor for peace building through sport. Kame argues that access to participating in sport activities remained restricted for Black South Africans in ways that white South Africans do not experience. One reason for this state of affairs was the influence of the apartheid system and the lack of facilities in African townships, which in turn offered few opportunities for the development of the range of leisure time activities enjoyed by wealthier communities. Another factor is the traditions of some communities themselves, particularly as these relate to the activities allowed and not allowed for women. She concluded that sport can be a powerful tool for community development and peace building. Sport can underpin and celebrate diversity. However, we need to be cautious of making false claims for sport or raising expectations that cannot be met. On its own, sport cannot reverse poverty or prevent crime or violence, solve unemployment, stop corruption, and respect human rights. If we are to build a better future for all, we must not be afraid to engage in some very difficult self-reflection and evaluation. For those who are interested in further exploring what has been done in South Africa and who are the main organizations on the ground, I would suggest taking a look at the tremendous work of these organizations: Africaid, WizKids United, Altus Sport Vuma, Oasis, Grassroots Soccer, and Kick for Life. They are all great examples of grassroots initiatives that are successfully implementing the important factor that Kame presented in her article. Sri Lanka is our third example for today's session. Although an internal conflict, its basis is ethnic and religious differences. Sri Lanka has been ravaged by a long-running and bloody civil war. Due to ethnic tensions between the Buddhist Sinhalese majority and the Hindu Tamil minority. The conflict cost the lives of an estimated 80,000 to 100,000 citizens, and hundreds of thousands of civilians were displaced. Although the war ended in May 2009, ethnic division remained entrenched and human rights abuses are widespread. From May 2010 to May 2011, FC Basel and the football club Social Alliance, guest club Tottenham Hotspurs, were actively engaged in the former civil war region Manar. After the end of the civil war in spring 2009, refugees had continuously returned. Back in their own villages, they were confronted with numerous different problems and challenges. The aim of the educational program was to offer vital new perspective to committed young people who strive to contribute to the development and reconciliation in the region after the conflict period. The Alliance supported this dedication of the young generation by offering a year-long education program to 28 young teachers and staff of local aid organizations. These young coaches were trained to act as social role models to the children. Apart from organizing football activities, they especially learned how to convey social topics and peace building through sport. A thorough evaluation of the first program in Sri Lanka revealed that the 28 young coaches passed on the education to around 80 peers. Their outstanding social work sustainably benefited some 1,400 children. Based on the successful results in Manar, the Football Federation of Sri Lanka proposed to implement a second coaching education program in Batticaloa and Kalumanai in the east of Sri Lanka in 2013. The football club Social Alliance second project in Sri Lanka aimed to facilitate a year-long education program for 28 young women and men. The coaching education program focused on the education, empowerment, and motivation of the young coaches to become proactive and socially engaged members of their communities, as well as contributors to peace building and reconciliation. Additionally, the project aimed to bring together young people from the two different districts. Due to different cultural and religious backgrounds, exchange among young women and men in daily life seemed limited. The inclusion of women and the promotion of mutual understanding between women and men, as well as boys and girls, therefore formed an integral part of the program. The evaluation from the second program in Sri Lanka that the 28 young coaches passed on the education to 65 peers, ultimately benefiting more than 2,000 children. The example of Sri Lanka is a great segue to our last topic of this session, which is the role sport team plays in peace building and their contribution to social impact. As discussed earlier, line between sport for development and development of sport is sometimes blurred. However, as we've seen in the Sri Lankan example, when professional sports team, local organization, and even a national federation collaborate, a holistic approach can be made. Professional sports teams around the world are leveraging their brand and resources to better their communities and build programs with social impact missions. Professional sports teams are identifying the powerful impact their brand has on members of their community. And as fan-based organization, their success relies on building strong and engaged community. In the Wharton School MBA project, Lisa Alexander, Liz Evie, Kat O'Brien, and Melissa Torres Buenadia have researched the impact of professional sports teams on sport for development and peace. Their research includes interviews with the social responsibility arms of the following professional clubs: Philadelphia Eagles, Atlanta Falcons, Chelsea FC, Tampa Bay Buccaneers, Everton FC, Tottenham Hotspurs, Derby County FC, San Francisco 49ers, Mifalot Hapoel Tel Aviv, Jacksonville Jaguars, and Manchester United. Their research is an interesting attempt to assess the social impact of the professional clubs in the non-professional sports arena, the one that we refer to as sport for development. The steps they have identified as crucial include: 1. Assembling the needs of the community. 2. Assessing organizational core competencies and resources. 3. The critical role of partnership in measuring and sustaining impact, and the necessity of backwards induction. 4th is the selection of impact initiatives, whether it's grant making, direct service, or somehow of a hybrid approach. And 5th, leveraging the brand. Now I ask you, what do you think? Does a professional sports team has what it takes to impact the community at large and move it towards peace building and reconciliation? So, in order for us to sum up today's session, we went around the world and took a closer look at some different examples of using sport for peace. The examples weren't different from each other only by their geographical context, but also internal versus external conflict, active conflict versus a post-conflict situation, and a grassroots initiative versus an external aid. We also carefully examined the role professional sports clubs are playing and can play in a community-based initiative, as well as in peace building. At the next session, Professor Gal Hamat will explore with you a successful case study of peace education through sport that enabled dialogue based on equal mutual grounds. Thank you very much.